Commanders for Israel's Security, or CIS, is a nonpartisan movement of over 300 retired IDF generals and their Mossad, Shin Bet, and police equivalents. CIS's mission is to secure Israel's future as a strong democracy with a solid Jewish majority for generations to come.
An organization of top Israeli retired generals who are concerned about the future of that nation. It is called Commanders for Israel's Security.
Since its founding, CIS has conducted major public education campaigns and private briefings to members of Knesset, senior government and security officials, as well as major media outlets.
If I have to choose between the entire West Bank, that there is no question this is the Bible land, and to keep the Israeli state Jewish and a democratic country, I would prefer the other choice.
CIS's work is based on thorough security analysis. We conclude that only an eventual two-state agreement with the Palestinians can secure Israel's future as a strong Jewish democracy. Until such an agreement is concluded, Israel should not sit idle. It must take the initiative and start to enact policies to separate from the Palestinians.
We are strictly being driven and motivated by security considerations.
CIS is proud of its role in generating a national debate over unilateral annexation and highlighting its associated risks and costs.
עלות הסיפוח תהיה 52 מיליארד שקלים בשנה, כל שנה.
With the immediate threat of annexation behind us, CIS will soon launch Security First 2020. Updated to account for recent regional breakthroughs, this plan details the practical security, political, and civil economic measures required to advance a secure separation from the Palestinians, while paving the road for a future negotiated agreement. As a nonpartisan movement, CIS is committed to support any government that embraces our plans. To find out more, visit en.cis.org.il.
We're honored to be joined today by former minister, former Israeli ambassador to China, and the current chairman of the Commanders for Israel's Security Movement, retired General Matan Vilnei.
Retired general.
Right, okay. Former general, of course. Former IDF Deputy Chief of Staff. I couldn't forget that. So, Matan, it's great to have you at the Jerusalem Post Conference. Thank you for being with us. But first, why don't you tell us just a bit about this movement, Commanders for Israel's Security? What's the purpose? What is it out to achieve?
Commanders is a movement of 300 generals from the IDF, an equivalent from the police, from the Mossad, and from the Shabak, that believes that we need to separate from the Palestinians in order to have a Jewish democratic state in Israel.
Mm-hmm. You were opposed during the run-up to the peace deal that was now reached with the United Arab Emirates, but you were opposed to the annexation that seemed to be coming. The Prime Minister Netanyahu had spoken about that annexation is going to happen, and your movement, and you especially, came out against it, said this undermines Israel, threatens Israeli security, but now it seems to be off the table in exchange for this deal with the Emiratis. Do you think it's really off the table?
I hope so. I hope it's off the table. We have to remember that no one used to talk about annexation. Only in the deep, deep right, they used to talk about it. Not Prime Minister Begin, not Prime Minister Shamir, not Sharon, not Olmert, not any Prime Minister from the right never talked about it.
But what makes it such a risk and a danger for Israel, in your opinion?
It's, first of all, you can't separate from the Palestinians when you annex part of Judea and Samaria to the state of Israel, unilaterally. Because we must annex some of the parts to Israel, we have to discuss it only after a discussion with the Palestinians, when we'll have some kind of a peace with them, some kind of relation with them, we can have it. But we can't do it without it.
But people on the right would say to you, with all due respect, that we've waited for the Palestinians, the Oslo Accords have not succeeded, there's intransigence, Abu Mazen's not coming to the table. How much longer can we wait? This is land that belongs to Israel. Israel should apply its sovereignty.
In the Middle East, you need to have patience. Mm-hmm. Not only in the Middle East, but especially in the Middle East. And you need to think and to look to everything from generations. Not weeks, not years, not even months. You need to have patience. And at the end, the main important goal of Israel is to separate from the Palestinians in order to remain a Jewish democratic state. Because if not, it will be a binational state, and it's obvious. It's only a matter of time. There will be most of the population will be Palestinians. So what we are talking about.
Right. I want to ask you about, you spent probably at least 4 decades in the military, serving up to the position of IDF Deputy Chief of Staff. You're one of the heroes of the Entebbe operation in 1976 when Israeli commandos and soldiers flew to rescue those Air France hostages. On the table now, sorry.
And speaking about Entebbe,
yeah.
Everyone remember whatever you want to remember. I remember one thing. The government was sure that we can't do it. But we, a small group of officers from the mid-level of colonel, decided that we can do it. It was our decision, not their decision. Although they took a cabinet meeting and everything, it's okay. But our belief that we can do it, we went to.
So on that note, the F-35 has come up as a platform that's going to be sold, this advanced stealth fighter jet, to the Emiratis in exchange, and maybe that's how President Trump was able to get them to come and normalize ties with Israel. Are you concerned? You were also Deputy Minister of Defense and Minister of the Homeland Defense in Israel. Are you concerned about the erosion of Israel's QME, its qualitative military edge?
I'm not sure that I understand the answer. I believe that every Arab state that is going to have diplomatic relation with Israel, recognize the state of Israel, it's very important. Although it's not peace, because we never fought them. We never was in a war with Bahrain and with the Emirates.
Right.
But it's very important for us that both of them are part of the Middle East that realize that Israel is a fact.
So it doesn't concern you then that the QME, the qualitative military edge, you think Israel, even if they get F-35s, will be okay?
We have to discuss it. I remember many years ago, there was a weapon that was called Amram. And the Americans decided, I believe it was when Rabin was Prime Minister, I believe it was Clinton presidency, they decided to give the Amram to the Saudis. The Saudis are not our enemies. We fought not to give it to them. And about the F-35, no one talked about it. The Prime Minister don't say the real truth. I put it very, but no one talked about it. We discussed it with our Air Force, with our IDF, with our commanders.
Right.
Therefore, you can't do it like this. It's very important, and it could be a problem, and it's a threat to Israel because it's a wonderful piece of equipment, this F-35, and it could be a threat to Israel, yes.
I want to ask you just, we have 1 minute left. You were as Minister of the Home Front Defense, you established the NEA, the National Emergency Administration, known in Hebrew as Rachel. It hasn't been used. It was set up for this purpose, to fight a pandemic, to help Israel in times of emergencies. Why is it not being used?
We have 1 minute. I'll cut it very short.
Okay.
No one really wants to fight the pandemic. Full stop, period.
Why?
I don't know.
Politics?
I'm not there. I'm not. Maybe it's politics. Because if you would like to fight the pandemic, we know how to do it. We rehearsal it more than one time. We have the right people, the right organizations, and we can do it. Till now, it's 7, 8 years, 8 months after it started already. No one is, it's politics. They will have to have a cabinet and to talk about it and to have closure. It's okay, it's wonderful. But no one is really fighting it.
Right.
We can do it. Of course we can do it.
And that's unfortunate. Chairman of Commanders for Israel's Security, former ambassador, former IDF general, former minister, everything. But still here with us. Thank you very much for being here, Matan Vilna. It was great to have you.
אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
Only 72 years have passed, and already there are those who have forgotten. Forgotten why they are here. How it ended the last time. And how everything resurrected. forgotten the price of a homeland. Sweat, tears, blood. Forgotten long ago those who showed up when called upon. Forgotten those who were left behind. Family, children, home. Forgotten the pioneering. The pride. Forgotten who is friend and who is foe. The sovereignty. Forgotten the flag, the self-dignity, and worst of all, forgotten the vision. We did not forget. Have you?
Our next panel will look at the topic of annexation, the application of Israeli sovereignty, which has been suspended since the peace deals were announced between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. It'll be moderated by Keinon, the senior contributing editor of the Jerusalem Post.
Thank you for being back with us today. Now we have a panel that is going to deal with a couple major issues that the country has been dealing with over the last few weeks. Number one is the extension of Israeli sovereignty, which some call annexation. The other is the peace treaty or the peace accords with the UAE and Bahrain. And finally, a little bit about relations with the United States of America as it goes towards the elections. On the panel, we have, to my right, we have Major General in Reserves Yitzhak Gershon. He's been in the Army for many, many years. He was the commander of the Home Front, the commander of the Judea and Samaria Division during Operation Defensive Shield. And today he is one of the senior members of a group called the Habithonistim, which is senior Israeli security officials who got together to push towards extending sovereignty. To my left, we have the Knesset Michal Cotler Wunsh. Thank you for being with us. And Eugene Kontorovich, who is the head of the International Law Department at the Kohelet Forum and also professor of law at George Mason University in Washington, D.C. Jerry, let me start with you, if I may. Your organization came into being, I believe, in February in order to push for sovereignty. I think one of the slogans was sovereignty now. We saw over the last couple of months that instead of sovereignty, we have a peace deal with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and who knows who else is going to be coming down the chute. Is it worth it? Is that better than having sovereignty?
Yeah, the decision about the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea has strategic implication for the existence of the State of Israel, especially when it comes to Israel's capability to defend itself on her own. So in that regard, we do think that the peace agreement has a potential to change the geostrategic situation in the region, in the Middle East, even worldwide. However, as we all know, agreements can be changed and the sovereignty will stay forever for generation. We must ensure that future generations in Israel won't need to live side by side with a hostile entity in Judea and Samaria as we all experience today in the south in Gaza.
But was it worth it? I mean, we had sovereignty versus the agreement with the UAE. Which is that a good trade-off?
What is amazing is that this administration, the current U.S. administration, changed the whole concept of how to do things in the region. First and foremost, this administration took in consideration the Israeli national interests as well as facts on the ground, that there are 2 million Palestinians living in A and B territory and in the Gaza Strip. But it's the first time that Israel interests are on the table. And the peace process that we are all experiencing today, which is very good thing for Israel, for the region, and for the world, is important as well. So there is no contradiction between the two. We need to move forward with the sovereignty over Judea and Samaria, over the Jordan Valley, especially in regards to our security, and parallel to that, to continue with the peace process, because this has a strategic meaning for Israel and for the region. What I'm hoping is that the Palestinians won't lose this momentum and will jump to the train. Hopefully they will understand that this momentum is something that they cannot afford to lose this time.
Eugene, is it compatible? I mean, is sovereignty compatible with the agreement with the UAE and Bahrain?
We don't know what's in the agreement. So it's very hard to know, is it a good deal, is it compatible? Because we first of all don't know if sovereignty was going to happen anyway. Right? If it was not going to happen, then trading it is certainly a good idea. But we don't know what the promises were made to the Emirates and how seriously those promises are taken by them. If it's the case that we promised not to apply Israeli law to any parts of Judea and Samaria, and we made that as a general indefinite promise, it was almost certainly not worth it. But I doubt that any explicit promise like that is actually in there. So
why wouldn't that be worth it? I mean, here you have a peace agreement with 2 Persian Gulf countries. Why is that not worth it?
Because Israel is where we live and the Persian Gulf is far away. The point of having a Jewish state is having Jewish sovereignty over the Jewish homeland. That's essential. That's what we're here for. And peace with the neighbors is very helpful. It's very nice. It's of extreme importance. But it's a means rather than an ends. Now, I do think that as a means, this is going to work very nicely, because I think what's happening here is, even if sovereignty isn't being implemented now, the value of seeking to implement sovereignty, the value of moving it up to the agenda, has really been proven. So it used to be said, unless we are talking about the creation of a Palestinian state, we lose our international legitimacy. One of the major problems with Oslo is it created this idea that our legitimacy is derivative of our willingness to create a hostile Palestinian state next to us. And if you're going to talk about the opposite, about applying sovereignty, you're going to lose the world. It turns out just when we started seriously talking about this, that is when we got peace from the Arabs. And that suggests that moving forward with sovereignty is actually the way forward. Because when we project strength, when we're serious, other countries will take us more seriously. How fast we do that, then that's a separate question. But it shows that the direction can only be towards sovereignty, not as it's been for the past 20-some years, away from sovereignty.
Michal, do you agree with that sovereignty is moving Israel into the right direction?
So I have maybe a bit of a different perspective, and I see them both as inextricably linked. So I think the paradigm shift inherent to what we know as the Vision for Peace plan, and we missed the opportunity of recognizing the paradigmal shift that was inherent to that plan, I believe, because we got distracted by talking about whether it's annexation or application of sovereignty or application of law. I think it's the one and the same sort of paradigm shift that's reflected in what I agree with Eugene, is this UAE, Bahrain prospect of a real and lasting, sustainable peace, forward-looking. And I would argue that, moving away from the 3 no's, we've now received yes to negotiation, yes to recognition, and yes to peace with Israel. That is the paradigm shift that I'm referring to, that I believe was also inherent to the Vision for Peace plan. The yes to recognition, and I say this as a lawyer, between 2 equal parties with equal agency, equal rights and responsibilities, and even the distancing of the leadership, the rejectionist leadership that over decades has not served its people well by enabling the yes to recognition, yes to negotiation, and yes to peace has been actually exposed. And it's been exposed first with the deals with the prospect of peace with UAE and Bahrain, but inextricably linked to that is the prospect of them leading forward and saying to the Palestinians, if they'll recognize it, and have leadership that is able to recognize it and lead forward, to say the first and unconditional acceptance that has to be there is that yes to recognition of the right of the State of Israel to exist alongside whatever it is that will be this entity that will be formed ultimately.
Let me segue this a little bit into politics now. I mean, you come from a party that was a bit miffed by the fact that they were kind of left out of this process. Netanyahu didn't tell Benny Gantz, didn't tell Gabi Ashkenazi that this thing was going down. He went to Washington and he kind of flew solo. But doesn't he deserve credit for that? I mean, doesn't Netanyahu kind of deserve to fly solo on this? Because he's the guy who's pushed this whole idea for the last decade that you can move forward with the Arab world without the Palestinians?
I want to be very clear. And credit should be given where credit is due. The real thing that we should be reflecting on or asking ourselves is, what does good governance require? What does a country that has proper protocol require? If we're looking at long-term plans and the way that a government runs or a country runs, then it's not personalized or politicized in this way. It is a historic moment. There is this paradigm shift that enables a long-term sustainable understanding of prosperity and peace in the region. And the question we should be asking ourselves, in my view, is not personal. It's not who should be there or who deserves the credit, but what does the State of Israel need in order to be able to embark on this journey in the best way possible, sustainably, depersonalized and depoliticized.
So you're saying this wasn't a good example of good governance and the way this thing was put forward?
That is probably the most important criticism that I have on what's happening even now. When we look at the challenges around COVID-19, I think what it's exposed is that the State of Israel, and again, I depersonalize this, the State of Israel at 72, and it is a miracle, has to be able to move forward and create long-term processes. It challenges us, it ails us very deeply that COVID-19 has exposed what has been ebbing just below the surface and is now above the surface on every level, whether it's health or any other area of our lives, everyday lives, education and so forth. There have to be long-term plans. There has to be good governance in a country that isn't just here on survival mode and that doesn't just speak the language of security anymore, that is a member of the nations of the world and runs in a proper way with good governance. Yes.
Eugene, good governance, you're an expert in international law. Are we seeing good governance in the way this thing was carried out?
Certainly, I think in terms of, if you're looking about personal credit for invitations, I think certainly the Netanyahu administration, government deserves a lot of credit. The Trump administration deserves a lot of credit. But if you're inviting people to the ceremony based on credit, I think the omission of President Obama was fatal. He should have been up there on the stage with the emirs, because I think more than anyone, he's responsible for getting us to this point, because by enabling potentially nuclear Iran, he allowed the Gulf states, whose objections to Israel were always more pro forma, more ceremonial, to get right down to the core of their existential interests. And when your country is on the line, when your life is on the line, when your religion is on the line, all sorts of epiphenomenon fizzle away. And even though this was not the intent, many actions have unintended consequences. And I believe President Obama and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action are the real authors of where we have gotten there today. I think Netanyahu and Trump were certainly very savvy in pursuing those possibilities, but they were really created previously.
It would have been fun to see Obama at that ceremony. Jerry, let me ask you a political question. Do you think that Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, would ever bring annexation back up again? And the scenario I'm thinking about, perhaps he's going to elections. He could be running against Naftali Bennett, his biggest rival right now. And he might want to kind of outflank Bennett on the right and bring annexation back up again. Do you see that as a possibility?
First of all, what we have seen in the last almost 20 years, that Netanyahu and any other politician will do everything to be elected again. This is the first thing. Well, but what's important is, more importantly, is to understand that this is the first time that the U.S. administration put an innovative plan on the table, shifting the paradigm from giving back territories, putting aside our national interests, and so on. And this is something that can lead these strengths of this administration with Iran, with the Middle East. What we see right now, it is a work of, I would say, of the last 4 years and 10 years of Benjamin Netanyahu. So if you come from strengths and you put your national interests on the table and not just say, okay, what I need to do, what I need to give you in order to have peace. No, this is our national interests. This is what we are standing for. We want to live. We know that the Palestinians are not going to anywhere, and we need to find a way to live side by side in peace and harmony. This is what every, I would say, ordinary citizen in the Palestinian Authority wants to experience. They are coming every day to work in Israel and so on. But we need to be very clear in regard to our national interest, especially our capability to defend Israel by itself. And this is something I realized when I became the Judea and Samaria IDF Forces Commander during the Second Intifada. I replaced Benny Gantz after 1 year of the Intifada, and what I saw is a confusing army that don't know where are we going. Are we continuing the arrangement, the agreements, or are we fighting a brutal terror attack by the Palestinian Authority? And if you don't know your strategy, every way is okay. Right now, I do think that Netanyahu will bring again the sovereignty, not annexation, because we don't want to annexing any single Palestinian. We want to apply sovereignty over territory and not over the people that are living in the Judea and Samaria.
Okay. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, that's all we have time for. Hopefully next time we can get into some other issues. Thank you all for being here.
Great pleasure. Thank you all.